Bonsoir à toutes et à tous.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being with us, for overcoming this heat wave temperatures, and to be with us at the end of these 3 days of debates. So we're going to debate for 55 minutes. We're going to stick with that time so that we can then go and take part in the final session, which will be held in Amphitheatre 1, the main amphitheatre. Thanks also to our panelists who are with us. I'm just going to very quickly introduce them. So from your left to my right, good evening, Bruno Chambon. You are specialized in investment in big infrastructure everywhere in Europe. Next to you, there is Pierre Poliac, who is the Director of Water Division for Suez. Thank you for being with us. Alongside you, there is Jérôme Stobler, who is chairman of Equans, which means equation and answer. That's the name of your organization. You've got 20,000 staff, and you're working on energy around a whole number of different countries. You have next to you Laurent Germain, who's CEO of Aegis. You are also co-chairman of the France-Saudi Arabia Council and vice president of the France-India Council within MEDEF. And just next to me, thanks for being with us. We've talked about heat in the south of France, and this surprised you. Srinivas Chokkakula, welcome. You are president and managing director of the Center for Policy Research in India, a think tank which thinks about the water sector and has a particular focus on conflict management and cooperation around water resources. So we'll talk more about that later. And then also to open this session, we are delighted, it's always a real delight to hear him, Alain Tranois, who's the director of studies at the EHESS and is a professor in Aix-Marseille University. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. So the title of this session is Designing Cities of the Future. So we know that we all know how to talk, but do we know how to design and think about the future? So when you look at this title, you might think, what are economists doing, getting mixed up with architecture? As I said in my most recent book, this is a discipline that really works and focuses on everything, every area. So what I want to do is hide behind the first person that talked about economics. So this is not Adam Smith, but Aristotle. Aristotle said that the economy was about thinking about the organization of the city. And so this organization of the city, we need to do this by thinking together with architects, urban planners, geographers, scientists, people who are all offering services in cities, like all of the panelists here, policymakers at local and national level, of course, as well. If we talk about cities, well, then we're going to be talking a lot about metropolitan areas, where there are significant areas. According to the historian Memminson, cities are to do with human creation, because this is where there's a collaboration and cooperation between human beings. This is where it is most effective, and this is a very specific framework, a very specific characteristic of our species, to collaborate a lot. What are the challenges in front of us? There are two key types of challenges: social challenges and environmental challenges. In terms of social challenges, of course, these big, large metropolises are home to massive inequalities between rich and poor. There's a segregation maintained by the high price of land, which comes from agglomeration effects. So the fact that if we all come together with a very high level of density, like today there's a high level of density per square meter, that makes it possible to have exchanges of ideas, to increase your network, and all of this improves well-being and cooperation for production even. And this is a very favorable thing, and therefore people are ready to pay to be at the center of density. So, and of course, if we'd had time, we could have looked at this question and looked at how we could avoid having rich ghettos and poor ghettos, but we're going to focus on the second part of the question this afternoon, which is to do with environmental challenges. I don't need to go into detail here about the environmental challenges. We're talking about air quality. We're talking about the threat of climate chaos and everything associated with this, with events and episodes that are extremely dangerous, with the massive fire in Los Angeles, for example, catastrophic floods that we saw in Valencia. So one of the questions that's really going to be key here is how can we face up to these? For me, there are 5 words, 5 verbs that are really essential. First of all, anticipate. Second, plan. Plan investment. Third verb is regulate. The 4th verb is incite and encourage, incentivize. And the 5th verb is how can we encourage this adaptation to climate change. So I want to wrap up with the final message is that when we visit ancient cities, Roman, Egyptian, Arab and Aztec cities, we're really struck by the quality of investment in terms of water structures. For example, there was real planning, and this seems really remarkable. So the first thing I want to say is that in order to design cities of the future, let's look at how cities of the past were designed. And perhaps I can wrap up with 3 optimistic messages. The optimistic message is that in terms of climate change adaptation, we don't have the same issue associated with climate change mitigation. It's not the same issues. That's to do with low carbon, etc. Climate change adaptation isn't. So the benefits of adaptation here, for example, in Aix-en-Provence, are concentrated here, essentially. So the benefits and costs are borne by the same people. So in that way, it's different than climate change mitigation. And I think that's really an excellent piece of news in terms of resolving these questions of climate change adaptation. And then in terms of these issues, which of course are associated with cities in the northern hemisphere, but also in the southern hemisphere, these cities in the southern hemisphere tend to have higher temperatures than we do in the north. And so this is undoubtedly an important vector for exchanges between the north and south in order to see what works elsewhere. So now I'm going to hand over to the panelists. I said, of course, that the municipal authorities have a central role to play through the 5 verbs that I gave. But of course, the question that we really want to ask you is, what role is there for private initiatives? What are the solutions that you can see in order to improve adaptation to cities, to climate change? Thank you very much. Thank you, Alain. So I'm going to turn to Gwenola Chambon straight away, who's just next to her. So you are right, Alain, that ancient cities were already designed. There were inhabitants, there was housing, there were also different structures, infrastructure. You said that there was infrastructure to serve the community, and you said that infrastructure must be dynamic because it needs to deal with constant change in all areas. So Gwenola, how are you seeking to imagine the city of the future so it can focus and so it can function a long time into the future? Yes, we are investors in infrastructure, and we've invested 10 billion over the last 15 years because I invest capital, and with leverage, this represents about 40 billion in terms of investment, capex investment from our funds. And what's really amazing is to see the development of infrastructures and the uses that have really changed. Today, when we look at a motorway, this becomes it needs to be a real offering of services for users. When we see digital services that also need to be integrated into territorial planning, and once again, we're thinking about use and efficiency. And things are changing really very quickly and much quicker than they used to. So in order to really be able to follow the reality, because the idea of infrastructure is really that we want to be close to the usefulness of infrastructure and make sure that it's affordable, make sure it's there's a long-term change. And so you were saying the key issue is planning. There needs to be at a sovereign and government level, there needs to be planning. And that's really the tragedy of these horizons. So we can perhaps respond to what was said in a previous panel. We're thinking about long-term thinking. How do you plan for something that's going to be designed for a number of different generations, that's going to be adaptable? We need to have exchanges between parties in order to make sure that things are adaptable, and then we need to be in touch with communities in order to make sure that what we're doing is relevant. And what's really going to be very important is to make sure that we're continually working in iteration with communities. So, for example, we are shareholders of the Malaga metro system in Spain, which has constantly been in touch with its users and asking them questions. And so we've developed contactless payment systems. We've seen that it's been important to show that we're completely autonomous in terms of electric power. We've put in place systems to recover energy from braking of metro trains. We also collect dirty water once we've cleaned the trains, and so there's a constant iteration in response to the community. So you're partly answering the question that Alan has asked about who should design. So you're saying inhabitants alongside the public authorities. Yes, local residents, inhabitants, definitely. But perhaps to come back to something else that was in another panel with the president of Eurocities, who brings together 38 different countries who really reflect 150 million individuals. And he was saying there are a number of different levels of policymakers at a public level. You need to remember that a mayor is in contact with the people that have elected him or her, and they are probably the best person that's going to know the needs of their community. So if I take an example of a narrative that we don't present enough at a European level, and it's really important to mention this, if we talk about digital technology, because for us there's a no-brainer. The state decided to put in place a plan. It divided the territory into 3, and then it gave resources at different levels of delegation in terms of regions and departments within France. It made it possible for public authorities to get equipped and become relevant in the digital territories and in the digitalization of the territories. And this has somehow helped us to balance out the knowledge of experts and what's going on the ground. And once we've found this balance, we understand each other better, and then we can work together to put in place infrastructure that is relevant. Time is against us. We really need to think by 2050, we're expecting that the majority of the population will be living in cities. 80%, that's massive. And that will represent 80% of our GDP. So everything will be happening in the cities. Thank you, Gwenola. Pierre Poliak. Perhaps 50 years ago, we might not have asked the question in that way, but whenever we talk about the city of the future, it seems to me that the question of water becomes a key question. This is not a resource that was necessarily an issue perhaps 50 years ago, but now it's increasingly an issue in terms of water supply, but also wastewater treatment. How do you think about this? Because Gwenola was saying that between now and 2050, about 80% of the population is going to be living in cities. Yes, in 2050, if we don't do anything, 80% of the French territory will have water stress in the summer. I thought I was going to have an interesting idea here, but you've nicked it from me. In terms of designing cities of the future, we're going to do the same as we used to do. Cities will be in places where there is a water source. Water is very difficult to transport. The Romans were right, and the Mesopotamians before the Romans, and the French, the Gauls. So the city of the future will be there where there is a source of water, the ability to store water, water stress in summer. And if we don't want populations to be migrating like birds in winter and summer, then we need to have a water source. And so we don't want to have a migration of populations, but we also we don't want to have the kind of situations where there's migrating, and so cities of the future will be where there is water sources. So essentially on the coasts, 80% of population will be in cities, but 80% of population will also be on the coasts. Why? Because of course populations need water, agriculture needs water, industry needs water, but if we want to be sustainable, a city wants to be sustainable, it must be accessible in very short term, and so it needs to get a supply for agriculture, it needs to find jobs nearby, and the change in the water cycle that we're talking about, it's not certain, but it's what's going to happen if we don't succeed. We're going to have a lot more droughts. That's already happening. We're going to have a lot more floods. Cities need to be ready to deal with that. And if I would agree with Gwenola here, is that that means we're going to have a digital city, not because that's a really cool thing to have and we can talk about in newspapers with amazing articles about digital technology, but what we want to have is digital technology that serves cities. The solutions already exist. What we're calling artificial intelligence today was something that existed 10 years ago, with infrastructure being driven by digital technology in real time, optimized, where future infrastructure will be designed using digital tools which will reduce needs for capital expenditure and investment. I'm sorry that you'll therefore be having less spending to do. But today we're still protecting ourselves from floods by building infrastructure when the infrastructure that we have is not yet optimized, the uses, I mean. So if we could talk about Suez, but also about competitors, we have digital solutions that take less than a year to be installed in the city, and we're going to push back the risk of floods by a number of decades and reduce the need for capital investment. So before we spend money on the city of the future, we need to digitalize the city. And then, of course, these cities are going to be frugal, they're going to be efficient, and they will be near the sea, I believe, with a lot of desalination. I think it's the only certain source of water. All the water that we're using today, it has been, we can't control it. We don't choose where it rains, but wherever it falls, it's not going to fall during the summer. And then the final point is not just water, but it's also waste. Cities of today consume, but cities need to produce. As we go on the current trend, by 2030, we'll be 30% down in copper supply in terms of, we'll be 30% short in terms of demand of copper. So but we have lots of copper in cities, and so we could dismantle here and recycle. Of course, we're saying that France is behind the curve. I don't believe that France is behind the curve, because when we didn't need to do it, then we're not going to be doing it. Israel and Qatar have already done this, but we're going to have to recycle water and not recycle it in the way that we do it now in order to water golf courses and clean streets, but we need to recycle it in order to feed it into the drinking water system, because when the population doesn't have any water to drink, then who cares if there's golf courses and clean streets? In terms of the smart city you're talking about, we could talk about circularity. What you're saying is that the city of the future, the players that exploit, that use the city, they'll be connected together, these different players, these different operators, these different public authorities. Can you imagine, therefore, a situation which involves technical connection synergies between players? Well, we won't have an option, because what AI provides, I'm not talking about ChatGPT, generative AI can do the same thing as you, but it can just do it much quicker and maybe better. So I, for example, made my wife's birthday card. I could have paid a designer to do it, but ChatGPT did it free for me. And you can tell her, because I did this on my telephone. She asked what I was doing, and I told her what I was doing. But what we want is systems that make it possible, that do things that humans can't do, thanks to its speed, in terms of real-time optimization, and also in terms of its power, in terms of computing power that would take us 100,000 years. And for 100,000 years, we're not going to be working on these things. And it's that AI system that's really going to release our forces. Fossil energy released and multiplied our power. It's given us, perhaps, someone else was saying, perhaps 200 slaves, as it were. But, well, AI is going to give us another 200, perhaps another 1,000 slaves, as it were, at our service. If I was a local politician, when I see local politicians, this is what I say to them: I would do nothing but digitalize my city, because as long as I've not done that, I am wasting my money and my resources. Okay, well, we're going to really hold on to that idea. So, Jérôme, who's just next to you, we can see over these last few days the weather has really shown us that we are seeing a general increase. This is a climate change that has been presented to us for a number of decades now, and future cities are going to have to deal with this challenge, with high temperatures, but also with the implementation of solutions to reduce them, but without continuing to increase heating. This is a complex issue. Yes, it's a complex issue. We build cities. What does building cities mean? Well, we're building cities not just to expand them, but to continually rebuild them. If I answer a question that was asked earlier, we talked about public-private partnerships. It's 150 years now that cities have been built through public-private partnerships, through concessions for water, for sewers, water recovery systems, energy concessions, electricity concessions. So there's nothing new about this kind of partnership in order to put in place these new waves of investment. We need another wave of investment. So cities are going to be built through transport systems. So I'll just give you an example, and then I'll answer your question. If you think of Paris, Paris in 1900 was 2 million residents within the current périphérique. Paris in 1950 was 2 million people in the current périphérique. Paris in 2025 is 2 million people within the limits of the périphérique still. The difference is that in 1950 there were 3 million residents in addition outside the périphérique, and in 2025 there's 4 million. So the density is not changing, but the size is changing. It's the transport system means we need to irrigate this whole area in order to reduce carbon. That we got the metro system, RER system, and now it's the Grand Paris, the Greater Paris Express network. And so this is all about emitting less gas, not only CO2, so that air can be breathable. This is necessary for survival in modern cities. And for energy, it's really important to invent energy hub cities. If you go to any city, there's a a local urban planning plan, but we need to show the local energy plan, because sometimes it's hot and we need cold, sometimes it's cold and we need hot. These networks, heating networks and cooling networks, represent a small level of our energy needs. We need to use solar sensors in order to collect solar power, and then you transform it into electricity. But you could go further in order to reduce heat. So here it's heat in X. This is perhaps less the question, but if think about the cities in the middle of France or in the north of France and all those latitudes above here, there's a balance between summer and the winter. And we have beneath us Earth, which is not a thermal conductor, which means that inexpensively we can store the cool or cold in the winter, and we can put in place air conditioning or cooling without air conditioning in the summer. 96% of buildings in the Netherlands are built with a principle that makes it possible to do that. We should do that in France. If we do that, we're going to reduce energy consumption of temperate cities by a factor of 6. We won't be able to do that immediately. We won't be able to change the Haussmann buildings in Paris really very quickly, but it's work that might take us 20, 30 years. And what it will do, it will make it possible for us to cheaply heat and cheaply cool and ensure that all this thermal energy that's sent off into the atmosphere in the summer and in the winter, because you put in a heat pump in order to cool down in the summer. And it means that we don't have to put in place all these different technologies. And that means in a dense city, that means 3 degrees lower with these systems on the streets beyond other systems. So it really is urgent that we need to do that. We need to start doing that so that we move forward over the next 30 years, because this is really very important work to be doing. And of course we can do that using private funds in order to accelerate this phenomenon. And it's really important that we do it over the next 30 years. It's a really key solution of the energy hub. The digital city requires governance. And of course, there are cities that are focusing on digital technology. Why would you do digital technology within the city? When you do it, you understand. It helps you to understand energy waste. And what we want to do is remove waste. And by doing so, we make real savings in terms of investments over just a few months, because this information makes it possible for us to control energy waste. This is the first phase. And then we're going to be able to provide something that's really essential. In a city, there is a client, and this client is the citizen. And what we do is we provide these citizens with essential aspects: security, citizenship, by ensuring that they don't put their dustbins anywhere. And then we continue to develop the city with cycle routes, cycle paths, and have an idea what's happening, and make sure that services of the city are well known by customers as the same way as they're known when you go into a shop or when you get on a bus, and you know how it works. And we need a digital system which provides information on services.
So there are solutions, very simple solutions. What is the cost to trigger that change that we're talking about? Cooling with geothermy. Why are we not there? That's what we wonder. Why is it not activated? I think that without constraints, we're not going to get there. We need to start with constraints, and then it's going to follow up. The Dutch people followed with a constraint because they had an earthquake, and nobody knows about it, and there's a pipe gas that blew up. And it nearly created a disaster, a full disaster. So they realized that before the problem of Russian gas, we need to get out of gas. And that was a trigger. And that's why the Dutch decided to, okay, there's an investment that is required. Electricity is more expensive than gas, so we're going to help people to do that. And they designed a very simple system. When you build a building or you renovate a building, if the price of gas is 50 euros per megawatt per hour, and you put in an energy coefficient of 4, so you consume 4 times less to do it with the right heat pumps, and you take 50 euros and you multiply by 4, and if you're under 200 euros per megawatt per hour, go ahead. If you cost 250 euros, for the first few years, we finance you, we help you finance this additional 50. So that's why people go, because they want to save the planet, of course, but because they have to make a collective effort to go there. So it requires a bit of constraints and a bit of help. So this is a solution. Is the episode of heat wave, can it serve as a trigger as well? Is it not a natural constraint? No, the heat waves, man has a very short memory, and they forget too fast. In September, everybody forgets about the heat wave that happened in July. And they rush to supermarkets to buy AC units on the day of the heat wave, they buy heater when it's very cold. People don't anticipate. It's just the way they are. Floods, for example, are going to make citizens react. What's going to help people react is to a political will that is based on the city, that is focused on the city. City is made of networks, electrical system, the grid, water cleaning system that require investments in infrastructure that are planned over durations of 20 or 30 years. So we have everything in our hands to decide to design the city, and some cities do it, and some cities get on with it, and they design an energy system. But we have we're very lucky, because compared to this European governance that we mentioned earlier, to the national governance, but it is a little more simple, but still complicated. But governance of a city is very easy to manage, because it's a small number of decision-making people who are close to the citizens, and they know the details of the city.
Merci. Laurent Germain, directeur général d'Egis.
Laurent Germain, General Director of Aegis, do you share the analysis of the snapshot of what the city of tomorrow will be? First of all, to design the city of the future, I feel the title a bit paradoxical, because I don't think there's much to design. There are 2 criteria to take into account that tell us what the city will be like. One is demography, and the other one is climate. Demography, there's 2.5 billion in the world that will live in cities of more in 2050 than today. So it's a huge challenge that we have to encompass. So it's 10 times the population of the United States, correct? Yes. So there's an increase that is absolutely huge of the number of human beings who will live in cities. In 2030, the metropolis that are the most populated are from India and the Gulf of, it will be Bombay, Delhi, and Dakar. Later on, they will compose 70 million people, and in 2100 there will be 50 million. There's Kinshasa and Lagos. So we're in a complete change of paradigm, because the cities of the future will be mostly located in poor countries, whereas yesterday the biggest metropolis are located in rich countries. So I would like to say something on that, because there's a major difference between the cities of the north and cities of the south. And the second data is the climate data. And if we look about the coastal cities, this is the data that is fundamental, is that in the scenario that is the most conservative, the sea level rise is going to go up by 1 meter, 3 meters in West Africa, and 4 meters in Southeast Asia. That means that a number of coastal cities will simply disappear. And I don't think that the entirety of the cities of the future will be coastal areas. What are the solutions? There's a solution that we didn't mention, that is the new city, modern city, and it's about building a completely modern city. It's not a solution that is brought about easily, because the experiences of new cities were not really successful. Because Jakarta, Cairo, for example, which are typical cities which are not sustainable. We built Tara in Indonesia. New Cairo is close to Cairo, 40 kilometers off Cairo. And a few years after these projects were launched, there are very few people migrating to this new city. So it is at the same time a solution that will allow people to migrate based on new principles adapted to the climate risk and to the new challenges. But unfortunately, the population are hard to convince to move and to migrate. Second solution is adaptation. And since we have this data and we know what the cities will look like and what they will become, it is really urgent to make the right decisions of adaptation. There is something that is very close to me is verticality. In industrialized countries, particularly in Europe, we're very much behind. Donc Europe has a lot of buildings that are high. If we want to stop the erosion of soils, we need to build more vertical, and we need to build a city on top of a city. I know it's very controversial, and particularly in France, because the metropolis are not in favor of having a skyscraper or very tall buildings. But one, it allows access to services for aging populations in a much easier way, practical way, and fast way. Second, it also allows to recreate social link, and also it helps reducing the emissions inside of the city. So that's a very strong difference to make between the north and the south. And today we know the situation, we know the technical solutions. We do a lot of climate risk diagnosis to be able to identify with the city's mitigation situations. We're doing this with the city of Montpellier. We first did it on the basis of just a neighborhood. We identified the vulnerabilities of this neighborhood, and we designed some solutions, which is the reinforcement of the greening of some areas, etc. So if we don't start right away in adaptation, it's going to be too late later on. Are there any lessons to keep from, you mentioned new cities, but you also mentioned eco neighborhoods or some cities that already started this transition? Is there anything we can inspire ourselves from? Of course. From the local experiments in eco neighborhoods, of course, that showed that we could diminish the heat islands, but also some larger scale success. For example, we were project manager of the greening of the city of Riyadh. The city of Riyadh, 1% of the area of the city that was vegetalized. Today, thanks to plantation of 7 million trees, we're going to go from 1% to 9% of the city that is green, which will have a direct consequence on the sustainability of livelihood in this city, but the amount of the population will double. Thank you very much, Laurent, for your analysis. Srinivas, you are from New Delhi. What is your vision on what the city of the future should be for a continent? You probably have a different look that we do. You study those questions around conflicts, of course. How do you imagine the city of tomorrow from New Delhi, this global city of tomorrow?
Yeah, first of all, this is my first visit to Aix-en-Provence, and it certainly surprised me. And just a quick clarification, I lead this think tank, which is more than 50-year-old and one of the oldest and quite well-known think tank. And we work on pretty much areas from social change to strategic affairs. Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Anywhere from social change to strategic affairs. I lead the program on water, so that's how it is. Not just focusing on water. So to quickly respond and relate to some of the responses here, in terms of the climate change vulnerabilities or otherwise other environmental risks. It's not just those that you see as manifested as something that like floods or otherwise droughts, but also there is this air pollution that you mentioned about. Delhi, every year you see that it turns into a gas chamber the moment we have winter. And then if you look at Delhi's in the past 3 or 4 years, in 2022, I think we had floods, and then in 23 there was drinking water scarcity. And the chief minister of Delhi went on hunger strike on the streets, accusing of the upstream state, saying that it's not releasing waters. And then 2024 had again urban floods within. So if you look at that, I mean, the kind of future design for the future city of at least Delhi, is that you need more robust inter-territorial coordination to respond to the kind of risks that we are saying. So the environmental risks, as you know, they tend to be extraterritorial. And then at the same time, it also goes to the kind of design questions that some of the colleagues have mentioned about. What do you know about climate change in terms of what are the kind of impacts that you have on the ground at the city scale? You know that there will be more extreme events and frequent events on the ground at the city scale. So your entire thinking about how you design infrastructure would entirely change to avoid floods and other kind of risks. You know, and so it's about not just about technologies, but also about institutional responses.
Do you believe that the city of tomorrow will be capable to solve the inequalities? Is this a mission that it should be entrusted with on top of hosting people and allowing them to work? Do you think we'll be able to build a model of a city that will solve the problem of inequalities? We're talking about Paris, inside Paris and the outside of Paris. There are many cities like this where the neighborhood is right, while the center of the city is quite rich and the suburbs are rather poor. Do you think in the city of the future will not have ghettos on the one side and centers that are rich on the other side?
At least we would want it to be more equitable and equal city. How we want to go about is that some of those, in fact, one of the shifts that the design of the future cities has to deal with and confront with is this artificial intelligence. You know, it's going to be transformative. And one of the things that I see, at least, you have the entire projections of on one extreme that it's just another technology, and another extreme that it is going to define the new civilization. Now, within that spectrum, I'd like to look at AI as something that would be transforming the way the city institutions engage with the citizens, and citizens engage with the city institutions. So I think there are possibilities with these kind of technological advancements and deliberate designs in terms of access to services. I'm sure there are possibilities of making it more equal and equitable cities.
On va un petit peu rêver, on parle.
Well, let's dream a little bit. We talk about the city of the future. If the city of the future was the first thing to accomplish right now, the first decision that we had to make, what would it be to go for the city of the future? What would the first thing you'd say you'd want to do?
Well, in fact, this has come through in this responses of the colleagues here. I think the way we would like to look at is the way the city institutions reposition themselves with respect to market forces and other kind of, actors like private sector, and how the city institutions can channelize the market forces and the private sector to improve city. I think, and as in fact, one of the colleagues mentioned about planning is a very key part of the key process, and that process, how you want to strengthen it to accommodate these forces towards designing the future city, I think.
Okay. Gwenola, même question.
Gwenola, the same question. We're not looking in 50 years. We're looking at right now. When you leave Aix-en-Provence, you want to make a major decision to change the city. What is your first decision? To make it more connected? If I had to design a new city from scratch, yeah, you have a white page. Well, the topic that we'll have to discuss and to solve is to be able to just sustain our economies. If we think for the next 30 years, we would need a planet times 6 to continue to exist as we're existing today. So I would design it in an eco-responsible way to make sure that it could be created with materials that I would use that are existing in existing buildings. So something that could be completely recyclable. That's number one. Number two is inclusivity, because otherwise they won't have any future. So we build the city of the future with recyclable material. Pierre Poliac, if you had to make, you mean a new city or a redesign of an existing? An existing city, I think I answer. I put digital everywhere. And a new city, I would say, I would put it at the estuary of a river, of a big river. Not on the beach, a little bit further away from the beach. Jérôme? The city, what would you do for the city of tomorrow? It would have to be a very frugal city. I think we're capable to build a city that is frugal in water, in energy consumption, capable to recycle its cold and its heat, to recycle its water. We shouldn't recycle water as much as we should in France. We do it in other countries because we have to, because of hydric stress, water stress. So we should be able to build a city that is frugal in its consumptions. And I believe that it's one of the solutions for sure. Laurent? I would try to get inspired from the common points that have all the cities that have declared considered each year as the most pleasant cities to live in the world, because year after year it's always the same ones that come out in those scores. It's Vancouver, Melbourne, Vienna, I think, and Copenhagen. So those cities have all share a number of common points, and one of their common points is the efficiency of their public transport and the interconnectivity of public transport. So I believe that I would focus massively on the progress of decarbonated transport and its interconnectivity. Okay, so cities that would be digital, transport, public transport, linked among themselves, the frugal cities, cities built with recyclable materials. Could we combine urban growth, energy frugality, and social justice and equality? We're going to start again with you, Laurent. Yes, it's totally necessary, because if we don't put in place some inclusive processes, what's going to happen? There'll be more segregation, social segregation within the cities, and this will lead to populism and to things that we really don't want to deal with. There are many cities that put in place and that funds, even like Vienna. What does Vienna do? They sanctuarize a percentage of their budget, very small, and all the public decisions that are made by the city take into account the interest of women. I'm thinking about security, and that leads to, of course, increasing city lighting to make it more safe, to have more safety in public transport. But it's very possible, but we need to put in place some things that will make that different categories of the population, the gender by gender, are represented and taken care of by these cities. Do you agree with this on this question? Yes. Gwenola? Jérôme? Yes, I think the answer is in the question. A city means live together. So if we don't solve the problem of social stability, we cannot address the initial question that is being asked. So of course there's some times where it's difficult, but that's the goal. And the city has to be built this way. There's a city that is particular and that can be criticized by certain aspects, but that does it. It's Singapore. Singapore has a system where there's a very strong social mix that is done inside the buildings, inside of the neighborhoods, inside of the education system. If a teacher becomes really good, he's being graded by the results achieved by students, and he is sent to the neighborhoods where the results are the lowest. And when we build a new building, we mix some housing, social housing, and housing for privileged families. And this mixity, this social mixity, guarantees the short-term and long-term stability. Because at short-term, people mix and understand each other and listen to each other and live together. And long-term, they train, they educate each other. This is a great model. Gwenola? I go back to my point at the beginning. The city is about citizens. So it also has to go through governance and a debate with citizens. And this is by maintaining a constant debate that will remain outside of the political cycles, because it is a tragedy. And it could be an absence of continuity of urban policy and land planning. Yes, the political time is not adapted to the long time of anticipation. And that's what you're saying earlier on, Jérôme. Yes. I have a very optimistic message. The city reacts very quickly. The governance is easier, and I believe that a major part of what is going to be done in terms of addressing climate change, addressing this sovereignty is going to go through the city. And also, there's going to be an example factor. One city who does good is going to be copied by other cities. So the city is going to be the trigger of solutions. And the city is one of the only entities that can think about its design in the long-term planning. And this is not randomly that the mayors have a mandate that is usually much longer. It's much long by nature because it's 6 years in France, and the majority of mayors are usually elected for a second, third, sometimes fourth mandate. So that means that it is a time frame that is needed to make choices that will have an impact. For example, versus, for example, the presidential mandate, which is 5 years, and we should be counting more on the local level and the level of metropolis, because they benefit more than others from the political stability. So this is going to happen in France in a few months. Long term, we don't have that, because I'm going to turn to the room. If there are any answers, there's a mic coming your way. Hello, I am from Paris. I have a point. I'm an elected official. Nobody talked about youth. And youth in the city is very important because it is often people who take a long time getting into the city, finding their way around, so sometimes easily, sometimes less easily. But I think it's a major issue, a challenge for a city. I'm surprised nobody talked about young people in the city. I'm happy to talk about it. And I'm going to tell you, we launched a think tank that is called Intravision. And the point is to combine all the ideas of everyone in the field of infra. And the time is running out, and we really need to combine that. So we've launched a challenge for 150 schools all over the world. And the goal, though, the question is asked to the young ones, is give us ideas. What would be the urban renovation, the urban planning project that you would be coming true? And this is schools, people who study politics, young people who study urban planning, politics, anything. We want to mobilize them to have their point of view, and because they will be the ones living in those cities. So something else, I think the young people live the city differently than we do. They live in the city much more than we live in the city ourselves. They live in the street, they live in bars, they use all the modular transport systems where we're taught to, as soon as we have money, we're going to buy a car. They don't want a car, they want to use transport. So they're citizens in the city much more than we were. We were in our building and we'd stay in our building. They're going everywhere. So that's why we need to bring them additional services, because they love it. For them, it's a place to meet people, it's a place to live, much more than what we experienced 30 years ago. One last question. The mic is coming to you. Quick question and quick answer. Hello. We talked about ecology, etc., but what I think is that for housing, there's a big issue What I'd like is that we give the priority to people work or pensioners or students, and that we get rid of the Airbnb and secondary homes. Thank you. So more mixity, more and less touristic housings. We made note of it. So I don't want to get into that debate, but just to give you a bit of info there. It's if you take Austria, there's a limit on the number of secondary homes that you can have. It's a choice that they made. So you cannot own too many properties. So because people cannot own many properties, they live the family home. They live in a family home. And they're going to find you're going to find yourself with cities, particularly in the valleys, that integrate the industry. And I'm not saying that we have to do this or that, but I'm saying that such a choice decides exactly how the city and the country is going to evolve topographically. So if you look at the geography of Austrian cities, it's a lot of middle-sized cities, and the concentration, everybody's concentrated. They stay in the village because they cannot go anywhere. They cannot buy anybody else's house because they have the limits. Thank you for the last word, Alain. I'm going to use Ben Wilson's words, the historian that I quoted at the beginning, who says that cities throughout their history have always managed to address the challenges that they were facing. So, of course, this is the hope that we all phrase today in this panel, but to do so in France next year, when we're going to meet again, the elections will be behind us. And as citizens, you have a role to play in the election process to determine the political platform of each political party, and particularly you, the young ones, but no matter your age group, to make sure that the priorities for adapting the city to all the challenges that it's facing today are taken into account throughout the next mandate of the mayor of each city. So this is in your hands, that you have the responsibility to adapt the city to all the different clashes that it's going to face. Thank you very much, Alain. Thank you, everyone, all our panelists. Thank you, Srinivas. Thank you, Laurence. Thank you, Jérôme. Thank you, Gwenola. Thank you all for your participation. The session is now in the amphitheater number 1. Will be the closing session. Thank you very much.